The most dangerous person in my childhood wasn't a stranger hiding in the dark. He slept in the bedroom next to mine, and the people who were supposed to protect us spent years pretending he could still be saved. By the time I finally learned the truth about my brother, it was already too late for someone else. And that's the part I'll never forgive myself for. I'm the middle child. My older brother, Jack, was only 2 years ahead of me. Then came my little brother, Oscar. From the outside, we probably looked like any other family. A hard-working father, a strict mother, 3 kids growing up under one roof. But houses can lie. Walls become very good at hiding screams. When I was little, I absolutely worshipped Jack. Everything he did looked cool. If he climbed a tree, I wanted to climb higher. If he played a video game, I wanted to sit beside him for hours just watching. He was my big brother. In my mind, that automatically made him my hero. The strange thing was, he never wanted me around. At first, I thought I was annoying. Then I thought maybe I wasn't old enough. Eventually, I stopped trying to guess. Mom wasn't exactly easy either. She suffered from severe thyroid problems. And whether it was the illness, the stress, or something much deeper, living with her felt like trying to predict the weather in the middle of a hurricane. Some mornings, she'd wake me up with pancakes. She'd brush my hair, tell me I was her favorite little helper. Those were the mornings I wished could last forever. Then there were the other days. The apartment would suddenly feel colder. Every tiny mistake became a crime. One afternoon, I was dusting the shelves. Dust triggered my allergies almost instantly. My eyes watered. I rubbed them. She spun around. "If you don't clean this apartment," she snapped, "I'll give you something to actually cry about." I remember freezing. The feathered duster slipped from my hand. Not because I was scared of being hit, although I was, but because 5 minutes earlier she'd kissed my forehead before school. How could someone change that quickly? As a kid, you don't question it. You simply convince yourself you must have done something wrong. The more distant Jack became, the harder I chased after him. Kids have this strange belief that if they just try a little harder, love eventually appears. Mine never did. It disappeared completely on my 7th birthday. Dad had taken a day off work. That alone felt like Christmas. He was always working, always exhausted. But that afternoon, he wheeled a shiny blue bicycle into the driveway. Sunlight reflected off the handlebars. The tires still had those tiny rubber hairs that only brand new bikes have. I couldn't stop smiling. Dad spent hours teaching me. Every wobble, every fall, every tiny victory. By sunset, I could finally ride without training wheels. I went to bed imagining all the adventures Jack and I would have together. The next morning, I pushed the bike toward him. "Want to try?" For the first time in what felt like forever, his face lit up. My heart practically exploded with excitement. Finally, maybe this was it. Maybe today we'd become brothers. He grabbed the handlebars, started running. I laughed and chased after him. Then, without slowing down, he steered straight into the brick wall beside our apartment. The crash echoed through the courtyard. Metal twisted, plastic shattered. The front wheel folded almost in half. I stood there, unable to process what I'd just seen. Jack wasn't hurt, not even a scratch. I ran toward him anyway. "Are you okay?" He looked at the destroyed bike, then at me. Suddenly he started crying. For one tiny second, I thought he felt guilty. Instead, he grabbed my shirt, punched me square in the chest, hard enough to knock the air out of my lungs. Then he leaned close enough for me to smell the bubble gum he'd been chewing. "Shut the hell up." His voice barely rose above a whisper. "Don't let Mom and Dad hear." Then he walked away, leaving me sitting beside the bike, trying to understand how my birthday had ended with me apologizing to the person who broke my present. That was the day I stopped chasing my brother. Not because I hated him, because hoping hurt too much. A year later, Oscar was born. The moment I held him, I silently made myself a promise. He would never grow up feeling the way I did. If nobody praised him, I would. If nobody protected him, I would. If nobody believed in him, I absolutely would. Oscar was the sweetest kid imaginable. He'd burst into my room wearing clothes 3 sizes too big, strike ridiculous superhero poses, ask, "Do I look cool?" Honestly, he looked like he'd lost a fight with a laundry basket, but I'd clap anyway. "Dude," I'd grin, "you look awesome." His smile made every lie worth telling. He believed me, and maybe, after hearing it enough, he believed in himself too. Looking back, I think that's why he survived our childhood better than I did, because somebody, even just one person, kept reminding him he mattered. As we got older, Jack changed, not all at once, little by little, like watching paint peel from a wall. At first it was skipping school, then disappearing overnight, then drinking, then drugs. Eventually, our entire apartment revolved around whatever mood he came home in that day. Sometimes he'd stumble through the front door smelling so strongly of marijuana that the odor reached every room before he did. Other nights, he'd blast music through a megaphone at 2 in the morning, not because he enjoyed it, because he knew sleep deprivation made my parents desperate. His routine never changed. Keep everyone awake, wear them down, wait until they finally handed over money just to make him leave. It worked far more often than it should have. Oscar was terrified. I'd pretend we were camping. I'd put headphones over his ears. Tell him thunderstorms sounded scary too. Sometimes I'd sneak him to a friend's house just so he could sleep for one night without screaming echoing through the apartment. I was barely older than him. Yet, somehow, I already felt responsible for keeping him safe. One evening I came home from school and found Mom standing in front of the bathroom mirror. She carefully dabbed concealer beneath one eye. Even from the doorway, I could see the purple bruising underneath. I didn't need to ask. Jack had done it. She caught me looking. For a second, our eyes met in the mirror. Neither of us spoke. She simply kept blending the makeup, as if covering the bruise would somehow erase what happened. That silence stayed with me much longer than the bruise ever did. The next few years taught me something no child should ever have to learn. Violence doesn't always arrive like a lightning strike. Sometimes it moves into your house quietly. One slammed door, one broken plate, one apology, then another, and another, until eventually everyone starts arranging their lives around the person who causes the chaos. That was our family. We weren't living together anymore. We were surviving around Jack. Dad still tried. God, he really tried. Every paycheck disappeared almost as quickly as he earned it. Therapists, counselors, rehabilitation centers, medication, hospital visits, support groups. Each new attempt came wrapped in hope, and every failed attempt left my father looking just a little older. I remember waking up one Saturday morning and finding him sitting alone at the kitchen table. The coffee in front of him had gone cold. Stacks of medical papers covered the table. Insurance forms, hospital bills, prescription receipts. He wasn't reading them. He was simply staring through them, like his mind had wandered somewhere too painful to return from. When he noticed me, he quickly smiled. Not a real smile. The kind parents wear because they think they're protecting their children. "Morning, buddy. Morning. You hungry?" I nodded. He stood up immediately, started frying eggs, burned the toast because he kept forgetting to flip it. Neither of us mentioned the papers. Neither of us mentioned the shouting from the night before. Neither of us mentioned the hole Jack had punched through the hallway wall. That became another family tradition. Pretending. Jack's explosions became impossible to predict. Some days, he'd stay locked inside his room for hours. You'd almost convince yourself things were finally getting better. Then, without warning, the entire apartment would erupt. A chair crashing into the wall. Glass exploding across the kitchen floor. Mom screaming his name. Oscar covering his ears before the shouting even reached its loudest point. It happened so often, our bodies started reacting before our brains did. The second we heard his bedroom door slam open, Oscar and I would look at each other. No words, just one glance. "Run." I'd grab his hand. We'd disappear into my bedroom, lock the door, push my desk against it. Not because it would stop Jack. It wouldn't. But children cling to tiny rituals. They make you feel safe. even when you aren't. One winter evening, the electricity went out during a storm. Rain hammered against the windows. The apartment was almost completely dark, except for a few candles Mom had lit in the kitchen. For a moment, everything felt peaceful. The wind howled outside. Oscar sat beside me coloring superheroes by flashlight. Dad was trying to make everyone laugh by telling terrible jokes. Then, the front door exploded open. Jack stumbled inside. Rain soaked through every layer of his clothes. His pupils looked enormous. His breathing came in sharp bursts. He looked around the apartment, confused, like he didn't recognize his own home. "Where's my money?" Nobody answered. I said. His voice rose. "Where's my money?" Dad slowly stood. "We don't have any." Wrong answer. Jack picked up the nearest dining chair and hurled it across the room. The wooden legs smashed through the cabinet door. Oscar screamed. Mom instinctively pulled him behind her. Dad stepped forward. "You need to calm down." Jack laughed. A hollow, empty laugh. Then he grabbed Dad by the shirt. I'd never seen my father look afraid before. That night, I did. Police sirens became strangely familiar after that. Neighbors called them so often. Sometimes officers already knew our apartment number before dispatch finished speaking. Blue lights flashed through our curtains. Doors slammed. Questions were asked. Statements were taken. Then, a few days later, Jack came home again. Every single time. I never understood why. As a kid, I thought police fixed dangerous situations. Instead, it felt like they simply pressed pause. School slowly became the only place where I could breathe normally. Teachers smiled. Classrooms were quiet. Nobody threw furniture. Nobody screamed for money. Sometimes, I'd stay after school just to avoid going home. Not because I loved homework, because silence had become a luxury. One afternoon, my history teacher noticed. "You waiting for someone?" I shrugged. "My dad's working late." She looked at the empty classroom, then at me. "You can stay here until he's finished." I spent almost 2 hours pretending to study. Truthfully, I was counting minutes, hoping maybe, just maybe, Jack would already be asleep when I got home. Oscar noticed everything, even when adults thought he didn't. One night, he crawled into my bed carrying his favorite stuffed dinosaur. He couldn't have been older than 6. He whispered so quietly, I almost didn't hear him. "Do you think Jack hates me?" The question hit harder than any punch ever could. I turned toward him. "What makes you think that?" He only smiles and we're gone. I didn't know what to say, because he was right. Instead, I wrapped a blanket around both of us. "No, I lied. He doesn't hate you. Then why does he scare us?" I stared into the darkness, searching for an answer that didn't exist. Finally, I whispered, "Sometimes people become sick in ways you can't see." Oscar nodded slowly, then asked the question that haunted me for years. "Is Mom sick too?" I frowned. "What do you mean?" "She keeps saying everything's okay." A long silence settled between us. Finally, I answered honestly. "I don't know." Things reached another level the day Dad found drugs hidden inside Jack's room. I wasn't supposed to hear the argument, but voices carry, especially in apartments within walls. Dad held up a small plastic bag. "What is this?" Jack didn't answer. "I asked you a question." Silence. Then, a shove. Dad stumbled backward into the hallway wall. Mom screamed. Oscar burst into tears. I ran toward the living room, just in time to see Jack standing over Dad with his fists clenched. His entire body trembled, not with fear, with fury. For one terrifying second, I genuinely believed he was going to kill him. Dad slowly raised both hands. "Not to fight, to surrender. You need help." Jack's face twisted into something I'd never seen before. "I don't need help." He stepped closer. "You people are the problem." The room became impossibly still. Even Jack looked surprised by his own words. Then he stormed out, slamming the front door. So hard one of our family photos crashed onto the floor. The glass shattered. Our smiling faces disappeared beneath hundreds of tiny cracks. I couldn't stop staring at that picture, because somehow it looked exactly like our family. broken, still technically together, but impossible to put back the way it once was. That night, Dad gathered Mom, Oscar, and me around the kitchen table. His face looked exhausted, older, like he'd aged 10 years in a single afternoon. He folded his hands together, took a slow breath, then quietly said the words that changed everything. "I don't think we can protect him anymore." He looked at each of us. "It's time we started protecting ourselves." Nobody moved. The words Dad had spoken settled over the kitchen like thick smoke. It's time we started protecting ourselves. For years, those words had felt impossible. Parents were supposed to protect their children, not protect themselves. From one of them, Mom stared down at the table. Her fingers trembled around a mug of coffee that had gone cold nearly an hour earlier. She never looked at Dad, never looked at Oscar, never looked at me. Instead, she whispered something so quietly I almost missed it. He wasn't always like this. Dad closed his eyes. "I know." He used to laugh. "I know." He used to sleep with that stuffed bear every night. "I know." Every answer came softer than the last, like each memory carried its own weight. Then Mom looked up. Her eyes were swollen from crying. "I keep waiting for my little boy to come back." Dad reached across the table and took her hand. The silence that followed said everything neither of them could. Deep down, they both knew. The little boy she remembered was already gone. A week later, Dad finally told us the truth. Not all of it, just enough. Jack hadn't simply become angry. He'd been diagnosed years earlier. Bipolar disorder. Severe, complicated by substance abuse. Doctors had warned them. Medication wasn't optional. Therapy wasn't optional. If he stopped treatment, things could spiral quickly. "What do you mean spiral?" I asked. Dad hesitated. He looked toward Oscar before answering. "The doctor said he could become unpredictable." Unpredictable. Such a harmless word, like bad weather or traffic. It didn't sound anything like broken furniture, bloody noses, or sleepless nights. I would grow to hate that word almost as much as I hated the phrase. "He's still your brother." At first, the medication actually worked. It was like watching clouds slowly move away from the sun. Jack smiled again. Not often, but enough. He apologized for things he'd done. Helped Dad fix the fence. Played basketball with Oscar in the driveway. One afternoon, he even knocked on my bedroom door. "You busy?" I looked up from my homework. "A little." He scratched the back of his neck awkwardly. "Want to play Xbox?" For a second, I genuinely thought I was dreaming. We spent almost 3 hours racing cars, laughing, arguing over who cheated, eating chips until Mom yelled at us for getting crumbs everywhere. When he finally stood to leave, he paused in the doorway. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "for everything." My throat tightened. "It's okay." I meant it, because I wanted to believe we were finally getting our brother back. That hope lasted exactly 18 days. It started with one missed appointment, then another. Then his medication bottles stopped getting lighter. Mom noticed first. She counted the pills. The numbers didn't add up. "You haven't been taking them." Jack shrugged. "I don't need them anymore." Dad tried reasoning with him. "The medicine is helping." "No," Jack snapped. "The medicine is controlling me. It's helping you. It's poisoning me." His voice echoed through the house. Oscar instinctively flinched. I watched Dad's shoulders sink. Not because he had lost the argument, because he'd heard that exact sentence before. Many times. Within weeks, everything unraveled. The laughter disappeared. The sleepless nights returned. Only now, they were worse. Much worse. Jack stopped eating. Then he started talking to people who weren't there. Sometimes he'd stand alone in the backyard, holding full conversations with empty space. At first, I assumed he was on the phone. Then one evening, I realized his hands were empty. No phone, no headphones, nothing. He nodded as if someone answered him, then laughed, a laugh that didn't sound human anymore. Oscar saw it too. He tugged on my sleeve. "Who's he talking to?" I swallowed. "I don't know." Truthfully, I wasn't sure Jack knew either. One Friday night, I woke to the sound of every cabinet in the kitchen slamming shut. Bang, 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 bang. The noise echoed through the apartment. I checked the clock. 3:17 a.m. I opened my bedroom door, just enough to peek outside. Jack stood barefoot in the kitchen. Every cupboard hung open. Every drawer had been emptied onto the floor. Knives, forks, plates, bowls, everything. Mom stood a few feet away. "What are you looking for?" Jack didn't answer. His breathing came in short bursts. They moved it. His eyes darted around the room. "They're hiding it." Dad slowly approached. "Who's hiding it?" Jack looked directly at him. "They are. There isn't anyone else here." Jack's expression changed instantly. His eyes narrowed. You can see them too. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. Dad didn't respond. One wrong sentence, and the explosion would begin. We all knew it. It did. Jack grabbed a ceramic plate, hurled it across the room. It shattered against the refrigerator. Pieces sprayed across the floor. Oscar screamed. Mom rushed him toward the hallway. Dad held both hands out. "Jack, don't. Come closer." Each word sounded like it physically hurt him to speak. His entire body shook violently, not from fear, from whatever war was happening inside his own mind. Then, without warning, he punched straight through the kitchen cabinet door. Wood splintered. Blood instantly covered his knuckles. He didn't even seem to notice. The ambulance arrived before sunrise, not because someone called for injuries, because Dad finally admitted, "We can't handle this anymore." The paramedic spoke softly, calmly, like people approaching a frightened animal. For a few minutes, it worked. Jack even agreed to sit down. Then one medic reached for his arm. Everything exploded. Jack shoved him backward. Hard. The man crashed into the dining table. Another paramedic called for police. Within minutes, red and blue lights painted our living room walls. Neighbors watched through their curtains. Children whispered outside. Our family's nightmare had become the neighborhood's entertainment. 3 officers eventually managed to restrain him, even handcuff. He never stopped screaming. "You did this." He pointed toward Dad. "You betrayed me." His voice cracked. "I trusted you." Dad stood completely still. Tears streamed silently down his face. He didn't argue, didn't defend himself. He simply whispered, "I'm trying to save your life." The police car pulled away. Its taillights disappeared around the corner. The entire street fell silent. Mom collapsed on the front steps. For the first time in my life, I watched both of my parents cry together. The psychiatric hospital kept Jack for almost a month. During those weeks, our home felt strange, quiet, not peaceful, just unfamiliar. Nobody jumped when a door closed. Oscar slept through the night for the first time in years. Dad repaired holes in the walls. Mom painted over cracked plaster. We even ate dinner together. It almost felt like another family had moved into our house. Then the phone rang. Dad answered, listened quietly, his face drained of color. When he hung up, nobody needed to ask. "He wants to come home." Mom's fork slipped from her hand. "No." Her answer came instantly. "They say he's stable." "No." "They can't keep him forever." "No." Dad looked at her with exhausted eyes. "We don't have a choice." Mom slowly stood. For several seconds, she just stared out the kitchen window. Then she whispered the sentence that sent a chill through my entire body. "If he comes back," she said, "one of us is going to survive." She wasn't being dramatic. She wasn't angry. She was simply saying out loud what all of us had secretly been thinking. Mom didn't sleep that night. Neither did Dad. Neither did I. The entire house felt suspended in time. Nobody turned on the television. Nobody touched dinner. Even Oscar, usually the one trying to make everyone smile, sat quietly on the living room floor, absent-mindedly pulling apart the wheels on one of his toy trucks. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was waiting. Waiting for a phone call. Waiting for a knock. Waiting for life to decide what happened next. 3 days later, Jack came home. The police cruiser pulled into our driveway just after noon. A social worker climbed out first. Then Jack. He looked different, cleaner. His beard had been shaved. His clothes were fresh. His eyes looked calmer. For a moment, a dangerous thought slipped into my head. Maybe this time it'll really be different. The social worker gathered us in the living room. She spoke gently, carefully. He has a treatment plan. She handed Dad a folder. Medication, weekly psychiatric appointments, mandatory counseling, if he follows everything. She smiled politely. He has an excellent chance. Dad nodded. Mom forced a smile. Jack never looked at any of us. He stared at the floor. When the social worker finally left, the front door clicked shut. None of us moved. Then Jack quietly said, "I'm tired." He walked upstairs, closed his bedroom door, and just like that, our family started pretending life was normal again. For a while, it actually was. Almost. Weeks passed without screaming, without broken furniture, without police cars. Dad laughed more. Mom started gardening again. Oscar invited friends over for the first time in years. Sometimes I'd catch myself relaxing, then immediately feel guilty for it. Trauma does that, even when the danger disappears. Your body refuses to believe it. One evening, Jack knocked on my bedroom door. "Can I come in?" I hesitated, then nodded. He stood awkwardly beside my desk. "I found this." He handed me something. It was a tiny silver keychain I'd lost years earlier, the one Grandpa had given me before he died. I kept meaning to give it back. I stared at it. "You had this." He nodded. "I'm sorry." Real remorse. Not forced, not angry, just sad. For the first time in years, I hugged my brother. He hugged me back. His arms trembled. "So do I," he whispered. I wanted to believe that moment meant something. I still do. But recovery isn't a straight line. It's full of cliffs. And eventually, Jack stepped off one. It happened so quietly, none of us noticed. He skipped one therapy session, then another. His medication bottle stopped emptying again. Dad confronted him. "I'm taking it." "No, you're not." I said I am. Dad picked up the bottle. Still almost full. The room went silent. Jack looked at the bottle, then at Dad. Then, without warning, he smiled. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't relief. It was the same empty smile I'd seen years before. The one that always came before something terrible happened. That night, I woke to shouting. Not loud. Desperate. "Dad." I rushed into the hallway. Mom was already there. Oscar stood behind her, crying. Jack was in the kitchen. Every cabinet door stood open. His breathing came in ragged bursts. "I know you're hiding them." Nobody answered. "They told me." He pointed toward the ceiling. "They're watching." Dad slowly stepped forward. "There isn't anyone there." Wrong answer. Jack grabbed the nearest kitchen knife. Everything stopped. Time itself seemed to freeze. Dad immediately raised both hands. "Jack." His voice barely existed. "Put it down." Jack's eyes darted wildly around the room. "They'll make you hurt me?" "No. They already have." "No. They've turned everyone against me." His grip tightened around the knife. Oscar buried his face against Mom. I couldn't move. My legs refused. Every instinct screamed, "Run." But I couldn't leave Dad standing there alone. Then something happened. Something I'll never forget. Dad took one slow step forward. "I love you." Jack blinked. "I've always loved you." Another step. "No matter what you've done." Another. "No matter how sick you are." Tears rolled down Dad's face. "I'm still your father." For one heartbeat, Jack's expression softened. His hand began to lower. Then, a voice. At least, a voice only Jack could hear. His head snapped toward the empty corner of the kitchen. His entire face twisted with terror. "No." He whispered, "I'm not doing it." Silence. Then louder. "I said I'm not doing it." He screamed at nobody. The knife slipped from his hand. It clattered across the tile floor. Dad rushed forward immediately, wrapped both arms around him. Jack collapsed, sobbing, not angry, not violent. Broken. Completely broken. I can't make them stop. His voice cracked between every word. They won't stop talking. Dad held him tighter. I know. I'm trying. I know. I'm scared. I know. The ambulance arrived minutes later. This time, Jack didn't fight. He climbed inside on his own. As the doors closed, he looked back at us, not with rage, not with hatred, just overwhelming exhaustion. I love you guys. Those were the last words I ever heard him say in person. Jack remained in long-term psychiatric care after that. Months turned into years. Some visits went well. Others didn't. Some days he remembered everything. Other days he barely remembered our names. The doctors eventually explained what none of us had fully understood before. The illness, the addiction, the damage, years without consistent treatment had changed his brain in ways that couldn't simply be undone. Mom cried all the way home. Not because she'd lost her son that day, because she realized she'd been losing him for years. One tiny piece at a time. Life slowly became quieter. Not happier overnight, just lighter. Dad joined a support group for families living with severe mental illness. Mom started volunteering with parents facing similar situations. Oscar grew into the kindest person I've ever known. Maybe because he'd spent his childhood understanding exactly how much fear other people carry. As for me, I stopped asking the question that haunted me for years. Could I have saved him? Because, eventually, I understood something important. You can love someone with your entire heart and still be unable to rescue them. Love isn't always enough. Sometimes people need treatment. Sometimes they need boundaries. Sometimes they need both. Years later, I visited Jack again. Gray had started appearing in his hair. Mine too. He smiled when he saw me. A real smile. Small. Gentle. I'm sorry, he said. I smiled back. I know. We sat together for almost an hour, mostly talking about childhood cartoons, basketball, old family vacations, normal things. For one afternoon, he wasn't a monster from my childhood. He was simply my brother, a brother who had been sick for a very long time. When I left the hospital, the sun was beginning to set. Warm orange light stretched across the parking lot. I stood beside my car for a long moment, thinking about everything we'd survived. People often ask if I forgive him. The truth is, forgiveness isn't a single decision. It's something you keep choosing. Again, and again, and again. Some days it's easy. Some days it isn't. But I've learned this much. Protecting yourself doesn't mean you stop loving someone. And loving someone doesn't mean you have to let them destroy your life. Those two things can exist together. For years, I believed my family was defined by fear. Now, I know it was defined by something much stronger. The people who stayed. The people who protected each other. The people who kept choosing hope, even after hope had broken their hearts. Because sometimes, the bravest thing a family can do is finally tell the truth.